Well, if you think our patch of the woods is confusing, imagine if you're trying to make sense of everything that's going on around the world, a world that is increasingly a bit of a mess. New York Times best-selling author Stephen Levitt is an economist. He's a co-author of a book called Freakonomics, which he and a mate put out a few years ago thinking it would be a bit of fun to muck around with data and try and explain how irrational the world can occasionally be. And then they found that they were riding a juggernaut. Stephen Levitt is on a tour of Australia. He's speaking in Melbourne next week. The talk is called The Future, Disrupted and Reimagined. Stephen Levitt, good morning to you.
Hey, John, it's great to be on.
And thank you for joining us via Skype if people are wondering about the slight delay on the line. The world's a bit of a mess. Can you explain why?
No, that's not my specialty. I can't really explain anything big. I try to focus on explaining the little things in life, incentives and how people respond. But if you think that I or anyone else can bring sense to what's going on in the United States right now, then I think you're in for a long search for those answers.
I love the fact that I asked you about the world being a mess and you replied by talking about the United States. That is a very American view, that the whole of the world is about what happens in the USA.
Well, that's certainly true, but more I think it came from me in the fact that I tend to only study things I understand, and I tend to understand the United States better than other places, But I hope this is going to be my first trip to Australia, and I'll be there for 6 weeks. So I'm hoping I'll have a little bit better understanding of Australia 6 weeks from now.
Well, just watch out. Koalas, when you cuddle them, they pee on you, and kangaroos can kick. We seem to be living in a world where there is a global flight from complexity. Why is that?
Well, I actually think that would be I'm not sure it's true, but I do think that simplicity is an incredible virtue, and I have a belief that in a complex world, so we live in a complex world. I think that simple answers are often the way to success in a complex world. If you talk about, I'm not sure what you mean by a flight from complexity. If you mean like a flight from the truth, then I'm obviously not in favor of a flight from facts and the truth. But I do think there is a tendency in business and in academics, certainly, to focus on complexity when often the simplest answers are the ones that will lead to the best outcomes.
But very often I find that people who don't really understand things can't explain them simply because they don't understand them well enough to explain them simply. So when you get a waffling answer, I often find it's because people don't really know what they're talking about.
Well, I'm sure you're right about that. I think most of the time people have no idea what they're talking about. And actually, one of my biggest messages is, if you don't know what you're talking about, just admit it. So I'm the first one that when people ask me questions I have no idea the answers, I just start by saying, look, I'll talk for a few minutes if you want, but I don't have any better idea than you do about it. I think if people were willing to admit they didn't know, the world would be a much better place.
We seem to be treated like idiots by a lot of the people who are purporting to run democratic countries, and there's a growing disillusionment with democratic institutions. Is there a solution to that?
I'm sure there is a solution. I mean, I can talk again about the U.S. I think what's happened in the U.S. is we've reached a bad equilibrium in that holding public office, running for public office, is just such a painful process that it's so adversarial. There's such a loss of privacy and such a need for ego in order to thrive in that space, that I think we attract a certain set of candidates who are not necessarily the kind of candidates you think might be the best at running a government or looking out for the public welfare. And let me say that's maybe an assessment of the problem. I think no one in their right mind would run for president right now who has the right kind of qualifications, or even for any elected office. I think that's the problem. Now, how to get out of that is a whole other issue. But many of my friends have served in government. I'm a professor at the University of Chicago in economics, and in past administrations. A lot of my colleagues have gone through the vetting process. And the horrors that they describe and the partisanship of what goes on in Washington would be enough to keep any sane person from putting their regular life on hold to go spend 2 years, 4 years, or a lifetime working in government.
Yes, it reminds me of Yossarian in Joseph Heller's classic Catch-22. You'd have to be an idiot to run for political office, but it should immediately be a disqualification from public office if you're an idiot.
Yeah. Exactly right. I couldn't agree more.
But who else would want to do it? We seem to have replaced rationality with fear as one of the guiding principles for policy making in this country as much as yours. Is there an antidote to that?
Well, fear is powerful. I might say that at least in the United States, fear has been at the center of the messages that we've our leaders have used for the last, in my lifetime, in the last 50 years. Ultimately, in a perfect world, I think a highly educated electorate would be able to make smart choices about things, and the educational system in the U.S. is not good. It's gotten worse over time, and it's really what's been most interesting to me about the last year or two is there's this silent part of the U.S., the part that is very pro-Trump, which is really invisible in the media and to people who live in Chicago like I do. And it's amazing that the power and the the loyalty they have that this group has to causes, and I think it's been a real eye opener for many Americans who just were unaware of this, very sizable minority, a silent minority.
One of the worries we have has been amply demonstrated just here in Australia this morning, just while you are speaking to me. The Prime Minister and the Treasurer for this country are announcing a complete U-turn on one of the most contentious public policy issues of recent months. There have been scandal after scandal after scandal revealing that the banks, the big four banks that control so much of the Australian economy, have been engaging in unconscionable and misleading conduct and, quite frankly, behaving appallingly in relation to their own customers. There's been calls for a royal commission into banks, which is our form of investigation. The banks have been saying it would be catastrophic and disastrous and would create a terrible economic climate for the big four banks, and it would be bad for the Australian economy, until they got to the point of realising overnight that it was inevitable anyway. They've just announced that they're now in favour of a royal commission, and within minutes the Prime Minister and the Treasurer do a U-turn, dancing to the tune of the bank's submission, saying, yes, now we think it's a good idea to have a royal commission as well. If you looked for a better demonstration of how vested interests pretty much pull the strings for our political leaders, you'd struggle to find a better example, quite frankly, Stephen. It's extraordinary. Yeah. You still there? Hello, Stephen. That's what happens on Skype. Stephen Levitt, economist, as you heard in Chicago, author of Freakonomics and Super Freakonomics. And Stephen's on a tour of Australia. He's speaking in Melbourne. A quick Google search will find, I think it's December the 4th, where he is speaking and how you get tickets. Stephen Levitt, co-author of Freakonomics, whose line on Skype just dropped out on us when we were getting to the end anyway.